Let me tell you something. Something a little uncomfortable. We are living in a time where almost everything is shared. Not just the big moments, not just birthdays or achievements. Everything. The coffee you drink in the morning, the random sunset you saw on your way home, your laughter, your sadness, even your lowest moments, carefully edited, filtered, and posted. It's almost like life isn't complete anymore until it's been seen. And yet, there are people who choose not to participate in that. They don't post, they don't update, they don't announce. They're there, but invisible. Watching, observing, understanding, quietly. You probably know someone like that. Or maybe this is where it starts to feel personal. Maybe that person is you. And the question that sits in the back of people's minds is always the same. Why? Why stay unseen in a world that rewards visibility? Why stay quiet in a space built for noise? At first glance, the answer seems simple. People assume it's shyness, or introversion, or maybe even insecurity. But that explanation is incomplete. Because what looks like silence on the outside often hides something much deeper on the inside. For some people, silence is not a lack of expression. It is a form of control. It's the decision to choose what the world gets to see, and more importantly, what it doesn't. Because whether we admit it or not, social media has slowly changed the way we see ourselves. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, almost invisible. At first it felt like connection. Then it became comparison. And before we even realized it, it became performance. We started sharing not just to connect, but to be seen in a certain way. Every post, every caption, every image began to carry a quiet question. Is this good enough? Do I look happy enough? Will people approve? And over time, that question started to shape identity itself. Not who you are privately, but who you appear to be publicly. But then, there are those who step outside of that cycle. The ones who don't post. The ones who don't constantly share. The ones who don't feel the need to turn every moment into content. And what's interesting is, they often see things more clearly than everyone else. They watch without interrupting. They think before reacting. They notice patterns. They understand people. They observe the unspoken. Because when you're not busy showing your life, you have more time to actually experience it. There's something else happening beneath the surface. Something psychological. Something subtle, but powerful. People who don't post frequently tend to develop a different relationship with themselves. They rely less on external validation. They compare less. They seek less approval. Not because they don't care, but because they've learned to find meaning internally. In a world that constantly asks, "Who are you? Show us." They quietly respond, "I'm still figuring that out, and I don't need to prove it." And that shift changes everything. Because let's be honest for a moment, most of what we post is not just communication. It's identity construction. It's a way of saying, this is my life. This is who I am. This is what I want you to believe about me. But when you stop posting, you slowly detach from that need. You stop framing your life in captions. You stop evaluating moments based on how shareable they are. And instead, you start living them as they are. A quiet meal becomes just a meal. A beautiful moment becomes something you feel, not something you document. A memory becomes something you keep, not something you publish. And in that shift, something begins to return. Something that was slowly fading. Presence. You begin to feel your life again, instead of presenting it. But this choice is not always easy. In fact, for many people, it begins with discomfort. There are those who used to post everything. They were active, visible, engaged. They shared their highs, their lows, their routines, their thoughts. But over time, something changed. What once felt natural started to feel forced. What once felt expressive started to feel performative. They noticed something subtle. Every time they shared something meaningful, they felt a quiet pressure to maintain that image, to keep up, to impress, to stay relevant. And slowly, they stopped living for themselves. They started living for the audience. That's when the exhaustion begins. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from constantly being seen, but not always being understood. So they step back, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. They post less, then even less, and eventually, they disappear from the feed entirely. No explanation, no announcement, just silence. And that silence is often misunderstood. People assume they don't care. They're inactive. They're disconnected. But the truth is often the opposite. They care deeply. They just don't want to reduce their life into something consumable. They don't want their memories to become content. They don't want their experiences to be filtered through opinions, likes, and judgments. They want to keep certain things untouched. There's a concept in psychology that explains this feeling. It's called psychological ownership. It's the sense that something truly belongs to you. A memory, a moment, a feeling. And when you share it publicly, that sense changes, just slightly, but enough to feel it. The moment is no longer entirely yours. It becomes something others can interpret, judge, misunderstand, or even ignore. So some people choose to protect that ownership. They keep their most meaningful experiences private, not because they're hiding, but because they value them too much to expose them. And maybe that's not withdrawal. Maybe it's freedom. Freedom from the need to explain yourself. Freedom from constant comparison. Freedom from turning your life into a highlight reel. Because if you really think about it, when was the last time you experienced something deeply without thinking about sharing it? When was the last time you laughed so hard and didn't reach for your phone? When was the last time you felt something meaningful and kept it completely to yourself? For many people, that instinct is gone. Or at least, it's been weakened. And that's not entirely your fault. Over the years, we've been conditioned, trained, rewarded. Every like, every comment, every notification. They all trigger something in the brain. A small release of dopamine, a feeling of validation, a sense of being seen. And over time, we begin to crave it. We start thinking in terms of, what can I post? What will get attention? What will people like? So when someone chooses to step outside of that system, it can feel unusual, even uncomfortable, but it's also a form of discipline. It takes awareness to recognize that loop. It takes strength to step away from it. Because you're not just stepping away from an app, you're stepping away from a way of thinking, a way of measuring your worth based on visibility. And for those who succeed in doing that, something interesting happens. Their sense of identity becomes more stable, more grounded, less dependent on external feedback. They don't need constant reminders that they matter. They already know it. And that kind of confidence is quiet. It doesn't need to be posted. It doesn't need to be announced. It simply exists. But it's important to say this. Not everyone who stays silent is at peace. For some, silence comes from fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being ignored.
There's a subtle pressure that exists online, a constant awareness that you are being seen, even when you're not actively posting. And for many people, that pressure becomes overwhelming. They begin to overthink everything. What if this is taken the wrong way? What if no one responds? What if I look foolish? And so, they retreat.
Not because they don't want connection, but because the cost of visibility feels too high. They want to be seen, but only truly, not superficially, not temporarily. And in a strange way, this creates a paradox. The quietest people online often have the most going on internally. They think deeply, they feel deeply, they observe everything. They are not empty, they are full. They simply choose not to display it. There is also something philosophical about this choice. In a world that constantly says, show yourself, promote yourself, be visible, choosing not to becomes a form of identity in itself. It's a quiet statement. I exist, even if you don't see me. And that idea can be difficult to understand in a culture built around attention. Because we've been taught that visibility equals value, that being seen equals being important. But that's not entirely true. Some of the most meaningful experiences in life happen without witnesses. Growth, healing, grief, transformation. These are not things that always need to be shared. In fact, they are often more powerful when they are private. Because in those quiet moments, you are not performing, you are becoming. And that is where real identity is formed, not in front of an audience, but away from it. This is where another shift happens. When you stop posting, you start noticing your relationships differently. You see who checks on you without reminders. You see who reaches out without updates. You see who remembers you without being prompted. And those connections feel different, stronger, more genuine, because they exist without an audience, without proof, without performance. And the people who live this way, they begin to value that more. They build relationships that don't need to be displayed. They share moments that don't need to be recorded. They experience connection in its simplest form. And in that simplicity, there is depth. There is also a sense of identity security, knowing who you are, even when nobody is watching. That's not arrogance, that's peace. And ironically, the same people who don't post often have the most interesting lives, but they don't feel the need to show it. They save their stories for real conversations, real moments, real people, because to them, connection is not measured in numbers. It's felt. And yes, they may be misunderstood. Some people will call them distant, or quiet, or even boring. But if you look closer, you'll see something else. Depth, awareness, clarity. Their silence is not emptiness. It is intention. It is the result of understanding something most people are still chasing. That not everything needs to be shared, to be real. That not everything needs to be seen, to matter. So the next time you come across someone who rarely posts, pause before you judge. Maybe they're not hiding. Maybe they're not disconnected. Maybe they've simply chosen a different way to live. A quieter one, a deeper one, a more present one. Because in the end, we were never meant to be constant performances. We were meant to be human. And sometimes, the most honest way to exist is quietly.